Warning: All Things Crime is a true crime production that may contain violent or disturbing material. Viewer or listener discretion is advised.
I did Bruce Willis while he was filming the movie Bonfire of the Vanities.
Wow.
With Tom Hanks. And again, a nicer guy you couldn't meet. A nicer
Bruce
guy you
Willis,
couldn't
man.
meet.
Love Bruce
And
Willis.
to be honest with you, all he wanted to do was shoot my gun. And I'm like, bro, you've done the Die Hard stuff. You shot stuff that I've never even touched. And I'm not. I look at my weapon. There are guys that are really into guns and whatnot. I'm not. I look at it as a tool, like a carpenter looks at his hammer. It's a tool. Now I'm very proficient with my tools, as any good worker should be. Why? Because I want to make sure. That's my life. I want to make sure I'm good at it.
Yeah.
Again, all he wanted to do, and I'm like, no. And I stop it. But I tell you, a nicer guy you'll never meet. He was not full of himself. He was a regular, down to earth. We had great conversation.
Scott, hey, welcome to All Things Crime.
Good morning, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing
Great to see you.
fantastic. Yeah. Hey, so glad to finally hook up with you. We got all our technical difficulties taken care of, hopefully. And
hopefully.
Yeah. It's amazing. Sometimes we can talk across the world and have absolutely no problems, and other times you can't talk to your neighbor, right?
Exactly. And we're stuck with what we have. We can't even, and now with the COVID, you can't even talk to your neighbor.
Yeah.
You have to yell at your neighbor a block away.
It's just such an honor to have you on, and I appreciate
Thank you.
You working through things for me. So yeah, I am positive the audience is going to absolutely love our discussion today. So everybody, I wanted to introduce Scott Wagner. He's a retired NYPD guy, and I'll tell you what, I've seen him on other shows, and one of the reasons that I'm so excited to have him on is just some of the stories that you have are just off the charts, man. And you would expect that first out of a New Yorker, and second of all, out of anybody that has 23 years with NYPD. You've got to just have seen so many crazy things. And New York is just in a town all by itself, just by its. I mean, there's a reason that there's entire famous songs that are written about it. They called the Big Apple and all those other things. And New York. Everybody that I've ever met from New York, honestly, and I have to tell you this, Scott. Before I have you introduce yourself, as a Westerner. And as a what we call flyover country, I'm in one of those states
I get it.
Yeah, that nobody really cares about if they live on a coast. And
right.
I think it's funny that most of the people that I know that have met New Yorkers have not had a good impression of them. And I'm like, you know what? First of all, you've got to just get to know them. And then once you do get to know them, you can't help but love New Yorkers. I mean, you guys are just in a breed by itself. And so that's another reason why I'm so excited to talk to you.
Well, you know what it is? A lot of people misinterpret the so-called New York attitude as arrogance.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say, yeah, we are arrogant to a point because, like you said, we're the largest city, in the country, and the hub, the financial hub, political hub. I mean, we were the ground zero for the coronavirus in this country. I mean, you name it, we're it. I mean, even going back, unfortunately, 9/11, why we were hit,
Right.
Back in the, I'm older than you. I remember back during the Cold War, as a child in public school, we used to have the drills where you had to get under the desk and everything. And at that time, the Empire State Building, which is basically in the center of Manhattan Island, was ground zero. that was, supposedly the target had there ever been a nuclear strike,
Right.
And, but I tell you, it's a tough place to live, not unlike Chicago, which they call like a mini New York in a way. I mean, architecture wise, attitude wise, it's a miniature version of New York in some ways. Of course, it's different politically. Chicago has, the Chicago way of doing things, as they say.
Right.
But New York also is the New York way of doing things. We, again, the largest police department in the world. Right now, the numbers are down because of the defunding and because of the attrition rate. The guys who normally would have stayed longer than their retirement dates, the morale is kind of low. It's morale is low in law enforcement across the country right now.
Oh yeah, so, it's horrible. Well, it's law enforcement, and that's another reason why I actually started this podcast, is because I want people to understand the entire investigative process, and not from a Hollywood point of view. The actual investigative process, starting from the crime scene all the way to what the detective has to do to put together the case, present it to the DA, prosecute it. There's a defense side. The whole process, I think, as a whole, is misunderstood. There's lots of cases that people can talk about, and certain things that certain people did, certain things that detectives did, certain things that the prosecution did. But I don't think there's very many people that are actually exploring from like a 30,000 foot view, and looking at it and saying, well, what is really the role of a homicide detective or a narcotics detective or a crime scene investigator? And that's one of the things that I'm really trying to explore here. And I think that's why you're going to be such an amazing asset to.
Well, my first theory is, I believe every politician, every mayor of any city that's having law enforcement issues, every member of a city council should be made to go through the police shooting simulation course, okay? Because, the expression of walk a mile in someone else's shoes?
Right.
Let me tell you something. It's, having been in combat situations in my career, and you fall back on your training. It's drilled into you in the academy, and you fall back on this training. Mm-hmm. And thank God you do, And with that being said, everyone is a Monday morning quarterback. Everyone, they say hindsight is 20/20. Sure. I mean, but you have politicians who are enacting laws that hamper and hinder the police, handcuffing the police from doing their job that they want to do. Let me tell you something. You're never going to be rich or wealthy becoming a cop or a detective or basically any civil service position, okay? But what you receive here in your heart or here is things that life lessons that you'll carry forever. And service is very noble. I don't care how you serve, whether you're in the military, you're a firefighter, a paramedic, a doctor. Look at all our doctors and nurses on the front lines. Look how during this pandemic, our heroes became grocery store clerks and truck drivers and bus drivers, the guys that have to be out there day in, day out while all of us are sheltered in. Everyone has to do their part. And again, you're not doing it for the money. Believe me, especially nowadays, you have to have a college degree to be a police officer in New York City. When I came on back in '79, you needed a GED. You didn't even have to have a regular high school diploma. As long as when you became, if you took promotional exams, you above the rank of lieutenant, then you needed college and management courses and whatnot, And again, I never had a desire to become a boss. supervise. I took a sergeant's test once, basically, just for the day off and the experience. But I never wanted to supervise others. I wanted to be a detective. And a detective in New York City, you see, in some departments it's different. A detective in New York City, your civil service rank, your civil service title is police officer. A detective is an appointed rank. It's an appointment. So it's not something that you could take a test for. There are some of the highest ranking chiefs or police commissioners that the NYPD has had over the years never held a detective's gold shield in their pocket. And it can, a lot of them are burnt by that. You know, I mean, really, because detectives are basically, you're entrusted to work unsupervised. I mean, you have supervisors you have to report to, of course, and sometimes you're given orders to do certain things, certain tasks. But that being said, when I'm out in the field on a case, my partner and I, we decide we're going to do A, then B, then C, and now maybe C will lead to D, hopefully, and then to E and F, and you keep going until you hit the wall. Then you regroup and you maybe we head in a different direction. You know, sometimes you start over, you go back around, but again, you're virtually unsupervised. You're out doing a thing. As long as you're there to respond, in the event, something occurs that you have to respond to, you're handling cases that, crimes in the past. Prior to me becoming a detective, I spent 6 years in plain clothes, or in New York, what we refer to as anti-crime, which was the career path to the Detective Bureau. And that's where you learn your skill sets, because you're not out there like uniformed officers responding to different jobs, everything from domestic violence to an aided case, a motor vehicle accident, a blackout, a stuck elevator, you name it. Not, the police get called to it. Cats in trees, anything, they get called to it.
So is that kind of the career path? You go from uniform to a plain clothes and then to a detective?
It was, but the NYPD did away with all plainclothes units during 2020. And that is.
So what has that done to, New York?
Well, I'm sure you read the news. You see the crime is.
It's New York.
We're heading back to the numbers that we had in the mid '90s.
Oh, prior to
even
Rudy Guliani.
Even graffiti is on the rise. Of all things, graffiti is coming back. I'm sure you've seen, the old movies from the 70s and 80s that took place in New York, and you see how the trains are all covered. You couldn't even see out of the windows of the trains, and we're going back to that. It's so our mayor has, I don't know why, for the life of me, has made, when I say us, I'm not only talking about the department, I'm talking about the city of New York, take 3 steps backwards. There should be constant progression, Yeah. I believe maybe 92. And again, that's when, I had been a detective by that time. I made detective in 89. Actually, in 88, I went into the Detective Bureau and as a white shield, they call it, as a police officer, but, designated investigator, police officer / investigator. And in 18 months, I was promoted to detective. That was the minimum amount of time back then that you had to spend to be eligible for promotion. Since then, what the city did was they passed a law that if you were working in an investigative unit or an investigative capacity for 18 months, you had to be motivated or promoted. So basically, it was called the 18-month bill. Because when I got promoted, there were guys that had been, working as investigators in the various detective squads for up to 40 months. You imagine that? Almost, 4 years without being promoted, And there was some jealousy. I got, there was some, and I didn't do it because I had any kind of a hook or anybody that was pushing for me politically or anything like that. I wanted it, and I latched on to the old timers, and I followed them around like a puppy dog. And I was a sponge. I absorbed everything that was around me, and they appreciated that. And they would feed me, basically feed me arrests, feed me, show me how to do things. So I had very good clearance rate on my cases. I cleared the majority of my cases in a positive manner. And I'll explain that later on. There's what's called positive clearances and negative clearances. Basically, it's a negative clearance is if you're a victim, let's say, of a crime, you got stabbed, and I come to interview in the hospital. You're not likely to die. You've been stabbed. It's a serious crime. You know who did it. But when I come to interview you, you're totally uncooperative. I'll ask. I've had guys tell me point blank, "I got this. I don't need you. I'll take care of it myself," kind of thing. You don't want to make an arrest with an uncooperative complainant, because down the line in court, you're going to look ridiculous. So unfortunately, those cases have to be closed, but they're closed. That's a negative clearance. A positive clearance is when you close something by arrest, or an arrest by, maybe he was arrested by another cop, or the person that's wanted is already in jail. Let's say he's doing life. We're not gonna, spend the state's money on a trial for a guy who's already doing, life. I mean, it's not worth it. So, with the DA's permission, you can clear the case positively. Or sometimes in cold cases, you'll find that you have enough evidence to charge someone, and you find out they're deceased. So once you establish that they are in fact deceased, you can close the case based on you have enough evidence to make an arrest, but the perpetrator is deceased. These are all positive clearances, okay? And then you have cases where it's not really a clearance thing, like missing person. The idea is to find the person, locate. When you investigate like a natural DOA, someone who died, they're found in their home, you have to respond. Detectives must respond just to make sure. I mean, they could be 80 years old. On the night table is 25 prescription pill bottles. You contact the family, next of kin. You contact the doctor. They've had this disease, that disease. So but you still have to take a look. You got to make sure, because that's what again, the old timers taught me. There's two things that are going to come to bite you in the butt if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, are DOAs and missing person. Because if you don't do your whole list, your checklist, and everything possible, and he or she turns up, the missing turns up dead, or or found somewhere else, when they were really, right there all the time, or the thing that the thing with death investigation is that I learned very early on also is things aren't always as they seem. I've had scenes that look like a definite homicide, and it was a suicide. And I've had suicides that you swore was a suicide that was accidental or staged. It was a homicide made to look like a suicide. It runs the gamut. So, like I said, you don't want to be embarrassed. You don't want to have the medical examiner call you up or call your boss up, your supervisor, your sergeant, your lieutenant, and say, by the way, we found a little hole behind the deceased ear, and there's a 22 caliber bullet, in the brain, and you said, she died of natural causes, so you have to dot all your I's, cross all your T's, right, and you'll be fine.
So based on what I'm sure you keep tabs on NYPD still, even though you've been retired for
absolutely
quite a few years.
Absolutely.
So,
especially my son, my oldest son is following my footsteps. So I definitely.
On the job is what you call it, right?
Yeah, we call it on the job here. Yeah.
There you go. So what do you see as being just a couple of major changes that have occurred, and kind of the different way that policing is done now, especially detective work that is done now versus when you were in it?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, technology that is at the fingertips of all investigators now is incredible. I mean, I'm retired 19 years. Thanksgiving of this year will be 20 years. I'm out. That's a whole career, actually, literally, of being away from the job. Oh, thanks. But with that being said, it's almost, I wonder if I would have been able, looking back, I could technically still have been there because I retired at 43. They age you out. They force you out at 62 and a half. So I'll be 63 in May. So I could technically have stayed till like Christmas time,
Right.
And of last year, rather, 2020. So I can't fathom, doing the job the way it's required now. I mean, with the video everywhere, I'm not talking just cell phone video. I'm talking about the cameras that, the city has, the traffic cameras, the pods, the private businesses, it's like every case has video. I had one case that had a video. It was a murder of a grocery store owner, and it was very unfortunate because the guy had the business for like 35 years. He was everyone in the neighborhood knew him. Great guy. He would extend credit. I mean, he was salt of the earth guy. And he got to an age, his kids were all squared away. So it was time to close up shop. So basically, he only had the necessities in the store. He had beer, milk, cigarettes, Pampers, formula, but he wasn't restocking his shelves. Why? So he just kept the essentials because he was retiring in a month and a half. Two guys come in, hold him up at gunpoint. He gave up the money, and for no reason they shot him in the face. Again, totally senseless. My partner and I, we noticed a camera. So now we go to find, the VCR, back then. This has got to be in maybe 96, 1996.
Now you do realize that there's people listening to this that
who don't know what a VCR is.
No idea what a VCR is.
Well, if you'd like to explain it.
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, it's
a video cassette recorder.
Yeah.
And the cassettes were about this big and about this thick, and there were tapes. It was, videotape. And they would use the same tape over and over and over again. So the quality of the tape was not good. Found the tape and we put it in the VCR and looked at it. It was so grainy and poor quality that even if you knew, if I knew, oh, that's Johnny Jones, that I wouldn't be able to say it via that tape.
It's so hard for people to comprehend that. It's like there's so many kids nowadays that honestly, they will never have the experience of trying to pull their cassette out of their car stereo and having that tape still in there.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, you got 20 feet of tape hanging out.
Exactly.
You got your pencil and you're trying to.
Well, first of all, they don't know what a cassette is. So that's a whole nother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The cassette's just the audio version. It's like the podcast version of a video, but it's the audio version of whatever,
Well, it was what it went from. We've come full circle. Yeah. Our music went from vinyl to 8 tracks, if you remember the 8-track tapes, which were the big tapes, cassettes.
Those things were huge, right?
Yes, I had one in my car.
Yeah.
And then it went to the smaller cassette tape, and then CDs started coming out.
Yeah.
And I remember having one of the first CD players. The thing was huge, and it played one CD. I mean, now, you have like a jukebox. You could load, 500 CDs on a carousel, and most people don't even have CDs anymore. Everything's, streamed, downloaded.
Everything's right here, man.
Exactly, and I still have my vinyl. There's something about the purity of listening with those little hisses and pops and crackles. But,
Yeah.
you call it nostalgia, call it whatever you like.
Well,
But there is something true about, and vinyl now is a huge resurgence now.
Oh, is that right?
So everything old comes back.
Yeah.
Everything old comes back.
Well, bell bottoms are coming back, for crying out loud.
Can you imagine? The one thing I hope never comes back are leisure suits.
Oh, right. Oh.
And if you remember the Kiana shirts, it was made of some rayon or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
My God.
I've got some pictures of me when I'm a 60s kid, and I was born in 67. And so all of my elementary school years are all through the 70s. And
so I'm 10 years older than you. I'm 10 years older than you. So I lived through that Saturday Night Fever.
Oh yeah,
I was there.
You were.
I used to bounce in that nightclub.
In the 70s?
Yeah, I bounced in that nightclub.
Wow.
And one of my best friends since high school, he's my son's godfather, is a huge music promoter. I'm sure you've seen Saturday Night Fever. It's an iconic movie.
Yeah.
He ended up owning the floor, the dance floor.
Yeah.
Yes.
That
which he sold
different colors of lights and things.
Right. It was made for the movie. That was not in the club.
Oh,
that was made specifically for the movie. And then it remained, they weren't going to dismantle it. It became part of the club. And he ended up with it. I believe it might have cost him maybe $3,000. And a year and a half ago, he auctioned it off because the Smithsonian wanted it. They actually wanted it because it's iconic.
Yeah.
And it was well over $1 million.
Oh yeah, it doesn't surprise
well
me
over $1 million.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
Because it's a piece of history. It was a time. It's an iconic time. Americana. It's a piece of Americana.
So where was that club?
In the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn. It was called 2001 Odyssey.
Right.
Named after the movie. Mm-hmm. And it was basically a small hole in the wall club. But it stemmed from a small article that appeared in New York Magazine, which is a magazine that's still popular today. And it's been around forever. And the article was called The Tribal Rights of Saturday Night. And what it was, a reporter kind of embedded himself, in this up and coming, disco culture that was happening. And that's where the hub was. Just like, now you go fast forward, to the early 80s, where did rap start? New York City, the Bronx. That's where it started. So again, things that New York, again, going back to New York City being New York City, so many firsts in every industry have started here, and continued through the world. No one thought rap would become what it is, the huge, it's a lifestyle. It's a, how it exploded. No one thought. They thought it was a passing fad, Now, again, it lasted. It had its run, and it was very lucrative. Again, like I said, my friend was a club owner. It was very lucrative, for the time. But again, like other things change,
Hey, let's get back to some cop stories here. So you shared in one of our many conversations that we've had since I've met you, and it's amazing that technology enables us to become friends, get to know each other, and yet we've never physically met.
Exactly. Because I feel a kinship to you already. I mean, just from our conversations and our texting and emailing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, and I'm not a cop, but I have a military background, so there's a kinship that belongs there, and it's all, again, I think that all refers back to the service that you were talking about.
Right.
And just as a side note, I think one of the things that life is really about is you have to find something that you are so passionate about that you're willing to serve and not really benefit from. And the benefit itself is the service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something my father told me, which was my father was born in 1914, World War II vet. And he told me how lucky I was that I loved what I did. He says, because as long as you love what you're doing, it'll never be a job. It will always be, it won't feel like work, if you understand what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
And I was very fortunate in that. And he told me, my father, my grandfather on his side, who I never met, he died at a very young age. My father was 8 years old when his dad passed, and his dad was like 43. Lord knows, what the disease was back then. It could have been any number of things.
Sure.
So basically, my father grew up, he had one sister. So he had his sister, his mom, his aunt, and his cousin all living in a household, and he's the only male. And he basically had to start, he was in public school, but he basically had to start working at 8 years old, 9 years old, shining shoes, doing, deliveries, any kind of hustle he could do. And my father grew up on the streets of a neighborhood called Williamsburg in the northern part of Brooklyn. And in those days, he, again, not unlike my childhood, growing up on the streets, he grew up on the streets. And he grew up, I don't know if you ever heard of what is called Murder Incorporated. They were professional hitmen that were mostly of Jewish descent, and they were freelancers. So they would just contract killers.
Yeah, freelance murderers. Got it.
Exactly. And they had no prejudice. They didn't care if they worked for the Irish, the Italians, they couldn't care less. All they saw was green dollars. And if there was a contract or something needed to be done, a leg broken or whatever, these were your guys. They were like, the go-to guys. And he told me stories. He ran with that crowd, and he could have very easily, especially in a single parent household, gone that way, especially, the money that they flashed, and, here you are, trying to shine shoes or sell newspapers or, collect scrap metal or anything to bring home, something to contribute to the household, because, his family, they were too proud to get any kind of public assistance.
Yeah.
Everyone worked, and he had to contribute his own. And my father told me, he said, with the exception of being in World War II in the Navy, he never enjoyed a day of work in his life, because he had first it was his family, his mom and so on, like I explained. And then when he met my mom, he met my mother in 49, and they basically eloped. It was kismet. It's a great love story, but that's for another time. But he was 10 years senior to my mother. He was a salesman at the time. So he traveled across country, even though his place of business, his office was in Manhattan, in the garment center, the garment district of Manhattan. He sold ladies' garments. So all the women he knew were models, and those models, they were called showroom models. They would model the clothing line for the buyers. And most of the buyers were former showroom models and whatnot. So when he would travel, let's say, to the factory, which was in North Carolina, or he'd have to go to Chicago or the West Coast, they would give him a stipend, but he would pocket it, and he'd be with one of the girls in their apartment, And it was quite funny. When we moved, we actually found his black book, his little black book, his little address book, and he had from all over the country. Every state, it's like he had every major city that he had to go to do business in, because they sold to big chains like Sears, which has been around forever, which was the Walmart of the day.
Yeah.
And things like that. So, he had to travel. And again, to save the money to bring home to the family, he would pocket the stipend in the expense account.
Yeah.
And he would shack up with one of these girls. And when he met my mom, that was it. He was knocked over head over heels, and that was it. So put it this way, my mom got pregnant with my older brother on the honeymoon. Now you're talking 1950, he was born.
Right.
Almost 9 months to the day they were married. Now, you know, society back then, had he been born prematurely, oh, the gossip.
Yeah.
You know, it would have been considered a shotgun wedding, as they call it, or, you know, and she would have been ostracized. Oh my God, you have no idea, you know?
Yeah.
So again, he went from his responsibility of his mom and his sister and his aunt and his cousin to now a family and kids right away, you know? So.
Oh, yeah. No, it's everything's changed. So
Sure.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about, you know, how your dad grew up and even how you grew up. And then I compared to myself. I grew up in Idaho, and my grandfather was the epitome of a cowboy.
Really?
Oh yeah. At 6 years old, he was out herding cows. He was on a horse.
Well, was he in the military? Was he in World War II?
My grandfather?
Yeah.
No, you know, it's a lot of people that grew up on farms were never actually went to war because they held them back.
Right, because we needed the production.
Yeah, they needed food to feed the troops that were overseas, and so that was one of his things. He was on a ranch and a farm, and on my mom's side, her older brother served, but everybody else was back home helping raise food.
Well, they were essential workers, like we call them now.
Absolutely.
So like, look at all I'll give you an example. My uncle, who was my father's brother-in-law, he married my aunt, and he was a construction worker. And during the war, he tried to enlist, and because of the trade that he was in, they refused to take him.
Yeah.
But mysteriously, within days of leaving the recruiting station, he gets notified of a job opportunity out in New Mexico. And basically, he worked on the Manhattan Project, which is, you know, the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And of course, he didn't know what he was doing. He was told, you know, here's a blueprint, you know, here's a diagram. You and your gang, you know, your crew, build this.
Right.
You know, the right hand did not know what the left hand was doing. And at one point, it's a little funny story, you know, he was writing home to my aunt because he would be gone for like 6 months at a time. Then he'd come home for maybe a month and go back. And it was such very good money back in the day. He was making excellent money. So it was worth it. And he wrote something. Of course, all the letters were read, you know, and things were, you know, redacted out of the letters, you know. And, you know, my aunt, I remember she showed me some of the letters, and you held it up and they were like cut out, like things were cut out with razor blades, you know, words, you know.
Oh, they physically cut them out. Wow.
Yeah, sure. And as were the letters he received from home. It was almost like being in jail, where they go through your mail before you get it. At one point, you know, my aunt was inquisitive to, you know, what type of work you doing, whatever. And he goes, off the cuff, he said something to the effect of, for all I know, I could be building a bomb. I don't know. And next thing you know, the FBI is at my, you know, their house. And, you know, my grandmother, again, I never got to meet her. My brother and sister did, but you know, she died before I was born. My grandmother on my father's side. She, you know, had such a thick accent. You know, they were from Poland, Austria, that area, and, you know, Eastern European accent, that their native language was Yiddish, which is almost a dying language now. You know, it's a combination of German and Hebrew and, you know, Slavic languages all combined. And, you know, they're asking her questions and she's trying to answer them. But these are, you know, these are agents from like where you live. They have no conception of, you know, ethnicity. They don't know anything but, you know, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That's what, you know, they don't know about, you know, the melting pot that New York is, you know? And it was an innocent thing that they interrogated them all, and he was called on the carpet. He was brought in and they interrogated him out in New Mexico. The story was they were gonna like put him in the brig because it was a base. It was a military base because
It's funny, just an off the cuff statement like that
again,
getting everybody in trouble.
Because they used to have the posters, loose lips sink ships, all over the place, and it was drilled into them. If you go off the base on your free time, you go out for drinks with the boys, or to go play darts or whatever you want to do, go play cards, go to anyone asks you what you do, because they would test them. They watch them workers, because all you needed was one leak,
Well, it's back then. And again, there's so many young people and even people my age that really don't have any comprehension of what that was like, because
they have no comprehension of World War II.
Right. Well, that's what anymore. I mean. It's because, World War II, I think, was the last time that the United States was actually felt threatened. And, even
before 9/11. Yeah. Before 9/11. Yeah.
Sure. And yeah, definitely before the last time the United States was ever really hit. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, even the Gulf War, none of those really threatened the United States. And until 9/11.
Right. Well, again, the Cold War was a constant threat. People would panic and build the bomb shelters and,
right.
Like what they call preppers today, people went to that extreme.
Look at preppers like they're crazy nowadays, but back then that was just normal.
But again, everything old, that's why you need to know your history so you don't repeat the mistakes and failures. It's funny, people have short memories. It's very sad how, I had to teach my son about September 7th. It's not taught in the curriculum anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, Pearl Harbor prior to 9/11 was the largest loss, largest casualties of Americans on American soil, since the Civil War.
Yeah.
The fact that we were fighting on two fronts. And again, we weren't fighting for oil. We weren't fighting for land. We were fighting against tyranny and persecution. And that was the European theater. Now, in the Pacific, that's who attacked us. And of course, they were allied with, the Japanese were allied with the Germans.
Yeah.
But, some, again, conspiracy theorists, like they have conspiracies about 9/11, they feel that President Roosevelt, they had the intelligence, they knew the attack was going to come, and they let it happen because he wanted to get us into the war. But they even called it Roosevelt's war at the time. People were against it,
I don't pay a lot of attention to the conspiracy theorists,
right.
But, just like as much as some people are, kind of enslaving to, the great war industrial complex and things like that. And I know there are politicians that are absolutely, they don't care because it doesn't affect them.
Absolutely. Exactly.
It's just like your mayor.
Their kids aren't boots on the ground.
All the policies that are happening, like the defunding of the NYPD, the New York City mayor doesn't feel that.
He's a lunatic. He's a lunatic. The man, I can't even fathom how you can be a born and raised New Yorker and have lived through what this city went through in the 80s with the crack wars. And then in the early 90s, when we almost were at 3,000 homicides a year, we almost hit that mark, And my generation of policing, think about,
that's almost 10 homicides a day. 10.
Like I said,
10
my generation of
a day.
My generation of cops and the generation that followed me brought that number down to 400 a year.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a city of 8.5 million people that reside here. Now, that doesn't include the 2 million that come in, well, used to come in on a daily basis to work here from, the suburb, whether you're, east of the city or north of the city, and that doesn't include New York's biggest monetary boost, which is tourism, and let's face it, New York City is the tourist capital of the world. I guess I don't know if it's between Paris and New York to be the tourist capital of the world, because everything is here. And it's funny, living here, you become jaded. Most New Yorkers never went to the Statue of Liberty.
Isn't that sad?
It is. There's so much here.
Yeah.
And yet you live here, you don't take advantage of it.
Well, I grew up in basically the Rocky Mountain, and until you've actually seen the Rocky Mountain, it's hard to comprehend.
I can imagine.
Once you get up into Canada, those mountains are just unbelievable. But the entire Rocky Mountain range that goes from Canada all the way down to almost Arizona. It is a range of mountains that until you've actually been up in them, you just can't comprehend it. And it's impossible to describe. But it's the same way with you guys. It's like when you're going through New York, when you've grown up there, seeing all the things of New York that you can see, like you said, in tourism. I've been through a number of different tours there, and I went to, and actually the very first conference I was ever at for the M-Vac, I stayed in Brooklyn.
Really?
Yeah, and the conference was actually right across the bridge in Manhattan, and so I stayed in Brooklyn, and I traversed the Brooklyn Bridge a couple of times every day.
Isn't it gorgeous? It's such a gorgeous structure.
Fantastic. And just walking around Lower Manhattan, and and this is let's see, what years were that? This has been 2007, 2008, and so there was still
post 9/11.
Yeah, post 9/11. Now I was able to visit New York when the Twin Towers were still there, and just amazing. And again, you can't comprehend how tall those buildings are until you actually get down there.
Let me give you an interesting story.
Okay.
Because I was also trained in dignitary protection. And what we did was our intelligence division of the police department, they're the ones who provide, they have a protection unit, not unlike the Secret Service or the State Department. Because remember, any visiting head of state that comes to the city, if they're a president or a prime minister, they get Secret Service protection. If they're anything else, they get State Department protection. But in every motorcade, including the president, the lead car is an NYPD patrol car. And of course, the outriders, the 28 motorcycles in front. And the first unmarked car is an NYPD detective car with the Secret Service, the supervising Secret Service agent who's in charge of that detail in the back seat. That unmarked car becomes our little mini command center. Because at the end of the day, you're going through our city. So if God forbid something should happen to the principal or the protectee, we're accountable. We're responsible. It's our city. It's our streets. So when we would have the UN General Assembly and all these heads of state from around the world would come in, if you were dignitary trained, you would supplement, the intelligence division, because they're also the ones that provide protection for the mayor, the different deputy mayors and the city council members and things of that nature. So when you have these huge things, they need help. Just like, when there's a big, convention or whatever, the Secret Service starts pulling agents from the Treasury Department, from DEA, IRS, you name it, you're a federal agent. And now suddenly, they're all trained in dignitary protection, even if they ride a desk their whole career, and you would be working with guys, side by side on a detail with guys who, again, like we're from where you are, and they're walking around with their heads up. They can't believe, the buildings.
Yeah.
And going back to comprehending the Trade Center, that was the last construction job that my uncle was on. And back in 72, I believe, I think it was 71 or 72, he brought me with him to the site, to the job site. And I was up on like the 80th floor. And, he had me harnessed, he wasn't. He was walking around like nothing. And the wind alone. And, you know, as a kid, it was amazing because there were no walls. You know, it was like, you're just out there. Yeah. You know, I'm 80 stories up, out there, you know. That was a distinct memory, of course, you know, left a lasting imprint on me. And I'm proud that, you know, my uncle was one of the builders.
Didn't they build the trade tower, you know, the Twin Towers in like, I mean, it took them just at a phenomenal 5 years or something like that. It was,
well, the quickest skyscraper to go up in history is the Empire State Building. It took a year.
It took a year to build the Empire State Building.
Yes.
And yet 40 years later, it took, why did it take so long to the Freedom Tower?
Politics. You remember also, that's landfill that they are building on. See, the Empire State Building is in bedrock. The island of Manhattan, that's all bedrock. That's why the Empire State Building could withstand a hit and not go down. You know, and the Empire State Building, it was built so quickly that, you know, they would bring, you know, the iron, you know, the girders and whatnot up from, you know, Pennsylvania, the steel mills, and they were bringing it up so quickly on barges up the Hudson River and trucking them across town. They were still warm when the workers got them. That's how quickly it was done, you know, and it's iconic and it's built. I mean, again, like the Brooklyn Bridge, it'll be there forever.
Yeah,
God willing. But I was on a dignitary detail with the president of Uganda, and it was a very small 3-car motorcade, you know, because, you know, in the pecking order of, you know, presidents, he's not, you know, he's not, you know, up there. I don't know where he stood, but
he didn't get his.
We provided him adequate protection.
He didn't get his 28 motorcycles.
No. He didn't get any motorcycles. He got us. He got one, what they call white top, which is one marked. You know, we call them RMPs. It's an old term referring to Radio Motor Patrol. That's how far that term goes back to the 30s. But we still refer to them as that. Radio cars, or, you know, you guys call them cruisers or whatever. We don't do that. We call them RMPs here. And you have one of those, and then an unmarked car, which is us, and then his car and what's called a follow car. That was it. And he had his own, you know, his own protection from his country, a detail of like 5 guys. But one of the things he wanted to do in his off time from the UN meetings was he wanted to go to the top of the Trade Center. So we have to oblige him. So we escorted him to the tower, you know, that had the observation deck. And standing there next to him, here comes a small Cessna plane coming down the Hudson. And we're, I don't know how many hundreds of feet above the plane, standing. And this is a president of a country who became so childlike. And again, we take it for granted because we live here. But he could not fathom the fact that he was standing higher than a plane was flying, you know? And he was, the look on his face was priceless, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, again, you know, we often say in the NYPD that especially a detective's gold shield is the key to the greatest show on earth. Okay. You get to see things and experience things, both good and bad, that no one else gets to see or do.
I can relate with a lot of things. You know?
It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Some of the things that I was able to participate in. I forget what other guys, you know, had done that I knew. Yeah. You know,
I'll give an example. You know, and I think everybody has specific moments when they look back on their lives and they're just like, yeah, that was cool. And
sure.
One of my moments was when I was with the 101st Airborne.
Oh, good. And that's where my son is looking at.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
He wants to be a Ranger.
Well, I went to Ranger school, and so I was Ranger qualified and airborne.
Oh, good.
And, I did a lot of things, but there was an exercise that we did, and I was, with my position, I was a battalion staff officer, and I was also the movement officer.
Oh, okay.
And what that meant was I was responsible for all the planning to get my battalion and all of its equipment on the planes. So I had to diagram basically
Right.
where each piece of equipment was going to be, how.
You were the coordinator for everything. Yeah.
Yeah. When so during the big exercises, I was kind of the backup guy. That it was my job. I would have been on the radio directing traffic. And if you know anything about the 101st Airborne Division, it's not actually airborne. It's called air assault.
Right.
And which means everything is airlifted with a helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
So the helicopters would come in, it would sit down, pick up all the guys. So the guys would all load it like a Black Hawk helicopter would load up all the guys would load into the helicopter.
Right.
It would get up and hover over the top of the vehicle or the artillery piece or whatever it was.
And then they'd hook it.
They'd hook it up and then they would both, there they go.
Mm-hmm.
And I was.
What are the big helicopters called again? The ones that
well, in the
can
Army
carry a tank.
Yeah, they're called a Chinook.
Chinook, right? Okay.
Yeah. And
I forgot. It was on the tip of my tongue, but thank you.
I actually had the experience of learning how to sling load underneath a Chinook.
Wow.
And, it's crazy. The airspeed as it's hovering, and boy, we are off on tangents right now. But hopefully this is interesting to everybody. But the
who cares? We're having fun.
Yeah, no kidding. the down blast of a Chinook helicopter is like 70, 75 miles an hour.
I can imagine. It could put you down on the ground. It'll floor you.
Oh yeah. Well, when you're directly underneath the aircraft, it's not, it's windy, but it's not near as bad. But it's when you're
right when you step away.
Yeah, when you're running out.
Uh-huh.
I mean, literally, you can cover 10 feet per step because you got so much wind.
Yeah. You feel like you got superpowers, right?
You're running and it's like you're on the moon where you can jump and
right. I can imagine.
Like 10, 15 feet. It's crazy. But yeah, there's so much wind underneath the blast behind those or underneath.
Yeah, I got a chance again.
Yeah.
I got a chance, doing a dignitary detail of going up, an NYPD chopper. Okay, because I was an alternate on Mayor Giuliani's detail because one of his guys would go on vacation, let's say, or he was out sick or whatever. He was so particular about who was surrounding him that you had to be recommended. And this guy, he was a buddy of mine.
Yeah.
And, I went in my direction, the homicide investigation. And, I took every course there was. So I did the basic dignitary protection, then the advanced where you learn motorcades and how to spin cars and, defensive driving tactics and all of that. I took every course there was, and because no matter how boring, and there were courses, believe me, that I took where you had to literally hold your eyes open to stay awake. But if you gleaned one thing out of it that could help you down the line somewhere, it was worth it.
Oh, yeah.
Plus, it's the resume. It's all about the resume. But he recommended me, and I would supplement them at times. And one thing about Giuliani, again, when he had his senses about him back in the day, is that he knew we were there to protect him. So he took very good care of us. In other words, if he was eating filet mignon and lobster, so were we. I worked on details where the protectee, or the principal, as they call it in the trade, is eating filet mignon and shrimp cocktail and lobster and champagne, and I'm at the hot dog stand outside, eating what we call dirty water hot dogs in New York, and even in the private sector, I've protected, you name it, I've done it, or I've been on the set for various things, I've done, countless people in the entertainment business, I don't really want to name names, but some were.
Give me one name.
Well, Clarence Clements, former sax player from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, when he went on his solo tour, I was his bodyguard. I did Bruce Willis while he was filming the movie Bonfire of the Vanities.
Wow.
With Tom Hanks. And again, a nicer guy you couldn't meet. A nicer guy you couldn't meet.
Love Bruce.
And to be honest with you, all he wanted to do was shoot my gun. And I'm like, bro, you've done the diehard stuff. You shot stuff that I've never even touched, and I'm not I look at my weapon, you know, there are guys that are really into guns and whatnot. I'm not. I look at it as a tool, like a carpenter looks at his hammer. It's a tool. Now I'm very proficient with my tools, as any, you know, good worker should be. You know, if you have tools on your tool belt or you know, tools of the trade, no matter what trade you're in or business, you're supposed to be proficient. I made sure I was proficient. You know, I did extra training on my own because, you know, the police department requires you to qualify twice a year, but I went on my own. Why? Because I want to make sure. That's my life. I want to make sure I'm good at it. You know, again, all he wanted to do. And I'm like, no. And, you know, I like, stop it, you know? But I tell you, a nicer guy you'll never meet. He was not full of himself. He was a regular, down to earth. We had great conversation, you know? And yeah, again, my thing was always, you must listen to me because I'm going to lay the law down to you. If I'm protecting you, I'm laying the law down. Otherwise, I'm not doing the job. I'm not taking the gig if you don't follow my instructions.
Well,
okay?
If you want to know about acting, you ask Bruce Willis how to do it. But if you want to know about protection, you got to talk to the guy that is actually trained in protection.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you know, for instance, I did President Clinton's detail a number of times. You know, I supplemented on his detail when he came to New York. And the last time I was he threw a birthday party for Hillary, and the MC was De Niro. I mean, it was all sorts of, you know, the who's who of the Democratic Party was there. It was at a huge nightclub that is no longer in existence. Let me tell you something. I technically should not have been as close to him as I was. I mean, because there's different circles, perimeters, you know, and as a local, you know, city cop, I shouldn't have been on that inner perimeter within arm's reach of the president, technically. But because of the situation, and Clinton was very charismatic, and he talked to everybody, and he looked you in the eye and spoke to you and made you feel important. That's one thing about that man. You know, he can talk to anybody across the board and make them feel equally as important. And he has a fantastic sense of humor. You know, again, I don't discuss politics. I'm just talking about the man that I met. I got to meet him. I shook his hand. And the thing about Clinton was he loved cops. And again, the most dangerous part is when the president is between Marine One, which is the helicopter he comes in on. Like they land Air Force One at, you know, Kennedy Airport, you know, the largest airport here. And then they'll ferry him via helicopter, Marine helicopter, to, let's say, the Wall Street heliport, or depending upon where he's going, maybe the 34th Street heliport that we have, you know, Midtown. So on this particular detail, I was on a harbor unit right off the water of the Wall Street heliport. With being in the military, you know, those binoculars that are on tripods that are, you know, huge. And I'm with a counter sniper from our emergency service unit. And our job is to scan windows and buildings, you know, and I'm like his spotter. And, you know, the way they would come in is three helicopters would come in together, and then two would break off. And then that was the one that would land. So you didn't know which one he was on. Same thing in the motorcade. There are two presidential limos. You don't know if he's in the first one or the second one. Okay. That's part of their, you know, it's no secret.
Yeah.
So he gets out of the chopper, and he's, you know, that's the dangerous part, from the chopper to the limo, which is maybe not even 15 yards. But he decides he wants to stop and shake hands with every uniformed cop there. And he's out in the open. And I remember this guy who was a sniper, and he was a sniper in the military, you know, before. And he was like muttering under his breath, you know, now it's dangerous, you know, and he knows the danger. And I'm scanning, and those binoculars are so powerful. I could see the pores on his skin, you know, and I'm, you know, 100 yards, you know, off, you know, from the helipad. He was like, oh my, will you get in the car? Please get in the car. You know, it's like, because you don't want to have to take action. Not on your watch. You don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
But
no, there's certain people that there's certain people, and we've studied. I've actually taken a public speaking course and all sorts of things. And Bill Clinton, as much as I don't know, I mean, he was one of the last few, I think, moderate,
very charismatic individual.
Oh, just unbelievable. He could command a room like
till this day.
Very, very, very few people can. And I think he will go down in history as one of the most charismatic politicians.
As Obama. Obama too. Obama, yeah. I mean, again, politics aside, I'm just talking about the man.
Yeah.
The way he spoke, you know, and the way he was able to, wonderful sense of humor, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
as did Clinton, you know.
Clinton was just a
regular guy.
I don't even know if I would put Obama in Clinton's.
Well, yeah. I'm not putting them, you know, side by side like that. I'm just saying the charismatic end of it.
No, I'm saying charismatically, I think Clinton, yeah, that man, I've studied him. He was much less, well, let me put it this way. And boy, we're way off on tangents now, but the amazing thing to me about Clinton is he could adjust on the fly in ways that
exactly
I don't think Obama ever could. And his ability to speak, I think he could recognize his audience. He could see things in his audience. He could recognize different levels of people that he's
we call it a riff. He could riff. He could just off the cuff. Yeah. He could just respond and, you know, get his point across. And if you watch some of his speeches, you know, especially when the media starts asking questions, if he didn't like the question, he had ways of letting the reporter know, you know, I'll answer it, but I don't like what I'm answering. Or the way you phrase it, you know.
But at the same time, he was such a master that I don't think the people other than that reporter really knew that he was getting hammered.
Exactly.
Because he was always, anyway.
Well, that's what I told you. When I got to shake his hand, he looked me dead in the eye and he put his hand on my shoulder, because we all wore, you know, lapel pins. Like the Secret Service has lapel pins. They get changed every day, different color or whatever.
Right.
And he knew. Again, he was like a cop buff almost. He loved law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And he knew that we were the local cops who were guarding him. Because sometimes, you know, we might have been supplemented with state police at some events, you know? So everyone had their own designated lapel pin. So he knew who were the NYPD cops. He knew who, you know, the feds were. He knew who everyone was. And again, to shake my hand and look me dead in the eye and make me feel like I'm the only one in the room.
Yeah.
That's the key. He had that ability.
Yeah.
He had that ability.
Very, very few people in the
He was able to cross all boundaries and talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And make them feel equally as important, which is a really impressive skill. Really impressive skill.
Yeah. Hey, listen, Scott, we have gone way longer than what we thought we were going to. I mean, obviously we need to be doing this multiple times, because just great conversation with you. Yeah. And, you know, I know you have a ton of stories that I'm going to queue everybody up for the next time we get together, because, you know, for just that story of how you became a negotiator, I thought was just really a lot of fun. But like I said, we are and you know, if these things run too long, then people start hammering me on it. But awesome discussion, man. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we got our technology fixed enough to have this conversation. So
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely.
Until Scott Wagner episode 2, let's adjourn for the day. What do you think?
You're the boss. You're running the show.
Well, I just don't want to also have a 4-hour podcast like you were talking about the other day.
Oh, the marathon that I did?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
Part three airs Friday night.
There you go. Well, I can tell you for sure, there are not very many people that want to listen to me for 4 hours. So we'll call it a day here for episode 1, Scott Wagner, the NYPD detective.
Been a pleasure.
All right, buddy. Okay. We will talk at you later.
Okay. Good seeing you.
You
Thank
too.
you.